Your cat is lying somewhere in the house right now, maybe on top of the wardrobe, maybe pressed against your leg, maybe watching you from a doorway with that look that seems to size up your every move. You closed the bathroom door and a few minutes later heard that little paw scratching at the wood. Or you woke up in the middle of the night to the familiar weight of warm fur on your feet. Or you noticed that wherever you sit, he shows up, not immediately, not obviously, but without fail. Most people interpret this in one of two ways. Either the cat is possessive and temperamental, or he simply likes warmth and comfort, and you're just a couch with a heartbeat. Both answers capture something real. Neither one tells the whole story.
Hello there, kitty cat.
Because researchers who have spent years trying to understand feline behavior have reached conclusions that challenge nearly everything popular culture says about cats. And once you know them, that look from the doorway starts to mean something completely different. Before we talk about what your cat does today, we need to understand how he got to you in the first place, because the story of feline domestication is radically different from that of dogs, and that difference explains almost everything. Dogs were actively domesticated. Over millennia, humans intentionally selected for docility, obedience, and attachment. It was a directed process with a clear purpose to create a working animal and a companion. Cats did something entirely different. They domesticated themselves. About 10,000 years ago, the rise of agriculture in the Middle East created a new, accidental ecosystem. Barns full of grain attracted rodents, and rodents attracted wild cats. The cats that could tolerate human presence enough to live near settlements had access to a nearly inexhaustible food source. Those that were too aggressive or too skittish kept their distance. Those that could modulate their fear and find a balance between wariness and approach, they thrived. Nobody created the domestic cat. It emerged from that silent, selective pressure over generations, choosing, insofar as an evolutionary process can choose anything, proximity to humans because that proximity was advantageous. The result is an animal that was not shaped to obey or to seek approval, but that developed a genuine and complex capacity to live alongside another species and, over time, to care about it. That changes what it means when your cat chooses to stay near you. It's not obedience, it's not training. It's a preference with 10,000 years of evolutionary roots. There's a cultural stereotype so deeply ingrained, it almost passes for scientific fact. Cats are independent, selfish, indifferent. They'd warm up to any human who opens the food can. The attachment, the story goes, is just the projection of a lonely owner. Science doesn't back that up. In 2019, researchers at Oregon State University published a study that became a landmark in the field of feline cognition. They adapted the same secure attachment protocol originally developed for human infants, the so-called strange situation, created by psychologist Mary Ainsworth in the 1970s, and applied it to cats. The procedure is straightforward. The owner leaves the animal in an unfamiliar environment, steps out for 2 minutes, and returns. The animal's behavior during the absence and at reunion reveals its attachment pattern. What the researchers found was that the majority of cats, around 65%, showed a secure attachment pattern. When the owner left, the animal became slightly more unsettled. When the owner returned, it quickly calmed down, resumed exploring the environment, and sought contact in a balanced way, neither excessively clingy nor indifferent. That pattern is identical to the one found in human infants with secure attachment, and in dogs. It's not a coincidence, it's the same mechanism operating across 3 species. What researchers call the attachment system. A set of behaviors that orients the animal to use a specific individual as a safe base, a source of comfort, and an emotional reference point from which to explore the world. The study also found that attachment patterns in cats are relatively stable over time and resist short-term socialization interventions, suggesting they're not simply a reflection of momentary mood, but of something more structural in the relationship between the animal and its specific human. Your cat doesn't attach to you because it has no other option. It attaches to you because, at some deep level, you have become the person who regulates the world for it. If you've ever watched a cat in an unfamiliar environment with its owner versus alone, you've probably seen the difference without knowing what to call it. With the owner present, the animal explores more, approaches new objects with greater confidence, accepts stimuli with less alarm. Without the owner, it contracts, hides more, takes longer to return to normal behavior. Researchers call this the safe base effect, and it has been documented in cats with the same rigor. It's been studied in dogs and humans. The owner's presence acts as a regulatory anchor, not because the owner does anything active, but simply because they're there. What makes this phenomenon especially compelling in cats is that it directly challenges the narrative of indifference. An animal that was truly indifferent to its human would not have its exploratory behavior altered by that person's presence or absence. The behavioral shift that researchers document only makes sense if there is a real and functionally meaningful bond. A 2011 study published in the journal Applied Animal Behavior Science showed that cats seek physical contact with their owners in stressful situations in ways they don't replicate with strangers. When exposed to mildly aversive stimuli, a sudden loud noise, an unfamiliar object, they tended to move toward the owner, not away from them. That is the opposite of what a purely instrumental animal would do. It is the behavior of someone who has found a source of safety in another being. There's a feline behavior that almost every cat owner recognizes, but few know how to interpret: the referential glance. Your cat encounters something it doesn't recognize. A new bag on the floor, the sound of the doorbell, a visitor at the door. And before reacting, it looks at you. It's not a distraction. It's not random. It's a consultation. Researchers at the University of Milan documented this behavior in detail. In one experiment, cats were exposed to a fan covered in colorful ribbons, clearly strange, mildly threatening. A significant portion of them, before deciding what to do, looked back at the owner. And then, this is the crucial part, they adjusted their behavior based on the expression they saw. When the owner showed a positive expression and a calm, reassuring tone of voice, the cat tended to approach the object. When the owner showed hesitation or negativity, the cat backed away. This has a technical name in animal cognition: referential looking. It's the ability to use another individual as a source of information about the environment to essentially ask, how should I interpret this with your eyes? Referential looking was documented far more frequently in dogs than in cats, which led researchers for a long time to conclude that cats simply didn't do it. But more recent research suggests the difference may be methodological. Cats do this, but in specific situations, with specific people, in subtler ways than dogs. They don't look at just anyone in the room, they look at you. Think about what that requires. In order to consult you when they need to, cats need to know where you are. Part of the following behavior, the appearing in the same room, the sleeping where you are, that's what it is. It's maintenance of access to the primary consultant. Here's a fact most people don't know. Adult cats in the wild barely meow at each other at all. Meowing is a behavior that cats developed, or significantly amplified, specifically to communicate with humans. Researchers in feline behavior, including specialist Karen McComb at the University of Sussex, have documented that cats have developed a surprisingly sophisticated vocal repertoire directed at their owners. In particular, she identified what she called the solicitation purr, a purr with an embedded high-pitched cry frequency that humans perceive as more urgent and harder to ignore than ordinary purring. What's striking is that this frequency overlaps with the range of a human infant's cry, the very range that the human auditory system evolved to be especially sensitive to. McComb argues this may not be a coincidence. Over centuries of close cohabitation, cats that used sounds activating human caregiving responses were more successful at getting what they needed. But there's more. Researchers like Nicholas Nicastro at Cornell University found that cat owners can distinguish their own cat's meows with significantly greater accuracy than they can distinguish those of unfamiliar cats. And cats seem to recognize this, modulating their vocalizations accordingly. They are speaking to you specifically. They have developed, over the time they've spent with you, a language that knows what works to make you understand. That's not cold manipulation. It's sophisticated communication built on top of a specific relationship. Purring deserves special attention because it is so often reduced to a signal of contentment when in fact it's something far more layered. Cats purr at frequencies between 25 and 150 Hz. Veterinary medicine researchers have identified that this frequency range is associated with positive physiological effects on bone and muscle tissue. Vibrations in this range stimulate bone consolidation, accelerate healing, and reduce inflammation in other mammals. This led to the hypothesis that purring may have originally evolved not just as communication, but as a physiological self-regulation mechanism. Cats purr when relaxed, but also when injured, frightened, or ill. What makes this relevant to the human-cat relationship is what happens on the human side. Studies measuring blood pressure and heart rate variability in humans in contact with purring cats show measurable physiological stress reduction effects. The sound and vibration of purring appear to activate parasympathetic responses in humans. In other words, when your cat climbs into your lap and starts purring, two nervous systems are being regulated at the same time, theirs and yours. That's not a metaphor, that's physiology. In households with more than one person, cats almost always show a clear preference for one specific human, and the criteria behind that preference surprise most people. It isn't necessarily who feeds them, who takes care of them most, or who is the most affectionate. Research on feline cognition suggests that cats tend to prefer whoever is more consistent, whoever lets them lead the interaction, and whoever has more predictable behavioral patterns. A study published in the journal Behavioral Processes showed that cats respond better to humans who wait for the animal to initiate contact. If you extend your hand and wait, rather than simply picking the cat up, you score higher in the feline evaluation. That makes evolutionary sense for an animal that was never shaped for submission. What cats seem to value in a human isn't dominance or generosity, but predictability and respect for autonomy. They prefer whoever doesn't force them. The favorite person also tends to be the one whose movements most consistently signal something relevant, who heads to the kitchen before serving a meal, who picks up their keys before leaving, who sits down before offering lap space. Cats build predictive models of human behavior with a sophistication that surprises researchers. A 2021 study from Kyoto University showed that cats can track their owner's location using auditory cues alone and display measurable surprise through attention-orienting behavior when the owner appears in a location inconsistent with the sound they'd heard before. They know where you are even when they're not looking at you. They are continuously modeling your whereabouts. One of the things that confuses people most about living with cats is the apparent inconsistency. He actively asks for affection, you start petting him, and suddenly he bites. Or he climbs into your lap, stays 5 minutes, and leaves without warning. This has been studied, and the explanation is more elegant than it might seem. Cats have what researchers call a tactile tolerance threshold that varies by body region, internal state, and level of trust in the specific human. In high sensitivity areas, the base of the tail, the belly, the paws, the threshold is lower. A stimulus that starts out pleasurable quickly becomes overwhelming. The bite that seems to come out of nowhere is almost always preceded by signals that humans routinely miss. A tail tapping lightly, the belly skin twitching, ears rotating slightly to the side. Researcher Dennis Turner, who spent decades studying human-cat interactions, found that the quality of interactions matters far more than the quantity. Short petting sessions, ended while the cat still wants more, produce stronger relationships than long sessions that cross the tolerance threshold. What looks like coldness or unpredictability is in reality a very precise communication system about internal state. A system that becomes more readable the more time you spend learning the body language of the specific animal you live with. Owners who learn to read those signals describe their relationship with their cats as far richer and more reciprocal than they ever thought possible. Not because the cat changed, because they started to listen. In 2014, an international consortium of researchers published the sequencing of the domestic cat genome and its comparison with wild ancestors in the journal PNAS. The results revealed something that reshaped scientific understanding of feline domestication. The genes that diverged most between domestic cats and their wild ancestors were not genes related to digestion, size, or disease resistance. They were genes associated with reward processing, fear regulation, and the capacity to learn through positive association with human stimuli. In other words, what domestication did, in genetic terms, was modify the cat's reward system so that social interaction with humans, touch, voice, presence, came to be processed as intrinsically positive, not as an instrument for obtaining food, but as something valuable in and of itself. Unlike dogs, where genes linked to hyper-directed sociability toward humans, such as GTF2I and GTF2IRD1 variants that overlap with Williams-Buren syndrome, have been identified, in cats, the process appears to have been more subtle, less a complete rewrite of the social system, more a fine-tuning of what produces pleasure and what produces fear. The domestic cat was not transformed into an animal that requires human companionship to survive psychologically, the way dogs were. It was transformed into an animal that genuinely finds value in human company when that company is offered on the right terms. That distinction matters. It means that feline attachment, when it exists, is more optional, more deliberate, and because of that, perhaps more meaningful. Just as with dogs, it's important not to confuse healthy attachment with separation anxiety. But in cats, the distinction has its own set of characteristics. Cats with secure attachment can spend reasonable periods of time alone without showing signs of distress. They can explore the environment, rest, engage with toys. When the owner returns, they show interest and sometimes seek contact, but not in a frantic or inconsolable way. Cats with genuine separation anxiety show a different pattern. Excessive vocalization during the owner's absence, elimination outside the litter box, destructive behavior, over-grooming to the point of creating bald patches, loss of appetite. Research estimates that clinical separation anxiety is less common in cats than in dogs, but it does exist, and it is more frequently underdiagnosed because the symptoms are attributed to a difficult personality or simply go unobserved in the owner's absence. The key point: a cat that follows you around, that shows up when you're home, that seeks your company at specific moments, is not necessarily a cat with an anxiety problem. In most cases, it is a cat with secure attachment expressing that attachment in the way that comes naturally to it, with restraint on its own terms, but genuinely. The next time your cat shows up at the bathroom door, or climbs into your lap at 10 o'clock at night while you're watching a movie, or watches you from the doorway with that look that seems to simultaneously evaluate and decide, here is what is most likely going on. It is maintaining access to a source of emotional regulation that it has learned, over the time spent with you, to recognize as reliable. It is using your presence, and sometimes your expression, your tone of voice, your movements, to calibrate how to interpret the world around it. And it is expressing in the discrete and autonomous terms of a species that was never shaped for submission, something that science has only recently found the right words to describe. It's not possessiveness, it's not opportunism, it's not the behavior of an animal that sees you as a useful tool. It is a living being that, across 10,000 years of coevolution and across the months or years spent specifically with you, has arrived at the conclusion that your company has value, that you are predictable enough to be trusted, attentive enough to be consulted, and present enough to be home base. For an animal that chose to stay on its own terms, that was never forcibly domesticated, that could have walked away from human settlements at any point and didn't, that is no small thing. It is in fact everything.